Hello, everyone. So we will be getting the meeting started shortly. I know there's a bit of a delay between what we're saying and what you're hearing, so it is possible that we may move on to another slide before you really get to say something. I think we're okay at the end if we've kind of passed someone. Do you want to try stopping mid thing and going back, or just waiting till the end?
We will try to give a little bit of time after each slide to answer questions, but they are going to be brief. We do have a lot of content to cover here, so we will do a more extensive questions and answers session after we get through all of our slides. So if you have questions that we don't get to or we aren't able to answer right away, please jot them down. So that you can ask them after the fact. And we'll do our best to kind of go through um, everything at the end, because some of your questions might be answered in the next slide as well. So we just ask you to bear with us as we try to get to everyone. We also don't want this meeting to run until 3 a.m. in the morning. Um,
Yeah, I
and
don't get overtime.
Yeah, neither do I. Jimmy does though, and
Interns.
yeah, I know. He gets triple pay over time, so triple of zero is still zero. Um, but yeah, we're gonna do everything we can to answer your questions. Some of these are going to be longer conversations that we're trying to start or continue depending on what the subject is. And again, these meetings aren't meant to be like the end all be all. They aren't meant to be the only touchstones for a lot of these topics. We just want to be able to have these larger league-wide discussions because we find them to be productive. And both Faded and I are going to make a concerted effort to make sure that more of these happen in the following, uh, the season coming up, as well as seasons after that. We recognize that there's been kind of a little bit of a ball dropped on our part in terms of getting these meetings together so we can all meet together. So we are making a concerted effort to make sure that there are going to be more of these changes, excuse me, more of these meetings so that we can implement some of the changes in these dialogues that we're continuing. So
So we gotta schedule a meeting to schedule our meetings for the meeting.
it sounds like my
Life.
profession, actually. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So I mean, let's go ahead and get started. The first little bit of this is more about dates and such. If you want to bounce it back and forth, Worky.
Oh, regarding, yeah, yeah. Do you want to go or shall I?
Go ahead, since I think you're the one doing the first one mainly.
Okay, so we are just as a reminder that the wiki is currently locked from editing while we attempt to transfer the website to a new server host. It might have been some times during this week where it seemed like it was not locked, but I assure you that any changes that you've made, um, I will probably transfer over. But we do ask that even if it looks like it's not locked at this point, at which it should, but the wiki is super weird and does weird things. We ask you not to make any more changes to the wiki because we can't guarantee that they will be transferred over.
Yep, and like I said, we're gonna be attempting to do this. The server we're transferring from is not necessarily the most helpful in doing that. So,
Yeah, this
fingers
was
crossed.
a pain in the butt 8 years ago. 8 years ago? 6
6.
years ago. Six, yeah, I got there. um, the wiki has tripled in size since then, which is phenomenal, which is like fantastic. We love that everyone has contributed so much art and stories and really built out their characters. But it also means that this process that was a very long process 6 years ago is now an astronomically nuanced process, and so we are going to try to get it done as quickly as possible so we can get the wiki up and running. But right now, everyone's focus is on new draftees, anyways, and those aren't really getting added to the server until later on in the break. So,
Yep. And well, we'll have worst case scenarios in the case that we can't get the transfer done in time, but we'll cross that
that's a
bridge when we get
conversation
there.
for a different
Yeah.
a different uh, meeting.
Yeah.
Right now, we do anticipate that this change will probably take up to a month. Um, I can speak for Faded, I'm sure, by saying we're hoping that it takes much sooner than that. But I'd say a conservative estimate, given that we need some time to kind of test things and make sure everything is up and running. Um, we are going to try to get it the wiki back open for you guys in September, and hopefully a brand new server, which isn't going to have be plagued with the issues that we've been getting more and more in the last couple of years as my hosting, literally the company my hosting, not and physically my hosting, um, has gone down the crapper. So.
Yeah. And one of the first dates people need to keep an eye on is the primary contact application period. You have until Monday, the 9th at midnight, essentially. Eastern, Pacific, it doesn't really matter. When I wake up on the 10th, I'm going to close the form. We have a number of open teams: the Albany Alphas, Bangor Tides, Biloxi Voodoo, Las Vegas Wildcards, Tallahassee Typhoons, Tennessee Moonshiners, and Texas Lone Stars. There are also 3 teams that have PCs who are willing to step down if there are interested parties. That's the Arizona Whips, Alaska Arctics, and Dakota Bikers. Uh, for some of you who've been a new primary contact slash GM before, you know that we started after the transition. We let the new people have an opportunity to use that leftover cap space. That will still be a thing. The exact window we haven't announced yet, mainly because it depends on when the server's done being transferred. So we will
And
announce
to
that. And
that
go ahead.
to that end, we are planning on having a living calendar like we do every year. Whether we,
Stick to
can
it.
to stick to that calendar is different, but we will have that calendar also kind of posted for you guys, at least for the free agency and off season. It will be pretty accurate once we have that server transfer. So that calendar is coming. I know you guys are probably anxious about dates, and we will get them to you as quickly as we can based on how this transfer goes.
Yeah, and reminder that if all the open teams aren't filled, those are the ones we're going to definitely prioritize filling. If you filled out the application already, you've seen that there are essentially 5 spots you can pick from, 5 teams. We're hoping to make it so that everyone can get their top choices. Uh, and if there are, for whatever reason, not enough applicants and there still are open teams, we will open it up for people to run more than one team. Uh, that's not ideal. That definitely adds a little bit more of having to keep track of conflicts of interest with
Yeah.
trades, and just generally it becomes a more messy. That's a lot. That's doubling the workload for someone of managing a team. It's kind of hard to do both, 2 teams,
It's
and
already it's already kind of a little hairy that, primary contacts also have a secondary contact team. Um, we muddying the waters even further by giving someone 2 separate teams to be the primary contact for. It gets hard for that person and for, just kind of being um, open and clear with your priorities.
hmm so that's coming up in this week. Hopefully, we'll have the announcement not too long after the 9th. Hopefully, it's not too complicated where every single person applied for the same team. Cough, cough. If everyone applied for the Voodoo just because they won the championship, this will be very complicated.
Um, yes, exactly.
Yes. Moving on to committee.
So, uh, we do have that primary contact application closing this weekend. At the end of next weekend, we have committee elections closing. If you are interested in
Applications.
doing applications, excuse me, I'm looking at the word elections and my brain is dumb. It's Friday. You guys get to deal with a Friday rookie today, so that's fantastic. Committee applications are going to be due at the end of August 16th. Um, there are a lot of people who have asked us throughout the year how can we help. Um, or I've done these tasks that um you've kind of you know asked for help with. Is there any way that I can do more for the league? And the answer is yes. You can apply to be a committee member. Committee members are expected to, as you see, exhibit leadership among your peers. Um, our main focus is to vote on canon issues, um, but we've sort of also become a secondary point of contact on Discord in terms of like being able to answer people's questions, and just mostly being willing to help build the community, both inside and out, with kind of by leading by example is really what it comes down to. And then of course, there's always the first thing you do as a committee member, and the last thing is you vote on the new draftees, and help to rank them in order, sort of like a little kind of passing the torch thing. Also keeping in mind that you need to put aside your personal differences when you get elected to the committee.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, disciplinary as well, also taking part of the process in that. So, I mean, uh, if you apply to be a committee member, you need to understand that you may be dealing with drama and having to process that. And if you aren't necessarily okay with dealing with drama or it might overwhelm you, then don't feel like you have to apply to be a committee member. Because I definitely don't want anyone becoming overwhelmed and needing to take a break or step down because of having to deal with that fun stuff.
There is some conflict resolution that does occur as a committee member, and if you're not comfortable with that, we strongly urge you to reconsider. But if you feel like that's something that you're at least comfortable with, or willing to put aside your maybe uncomfortableness with in order to apply anyways. That's just something to keep in mind as you fill out your applications.
Yep, and like Roki said, it closes end of next weekend, Monday. If only Monday was a weekend day. Draftee submissions. Okay, guys, we already extended this once. August 8th at midnight. Please, please get them in. Currently, we don't have enough unique contributors submissions for a top 24. The rule for top 24 is that we've always had it so that only one player from one contributor is allowed in the top 24. If we don't get 24 unique contributors by Monday, it's possible we might finally have to break that tradition and have uh, more than one top 24 from people. Or committee might have to make a joint top 24 submissions that are up for adoption for new creators. Like I said, if you haven't submitted a draftee at all yet, please do. We need them for the top 24 at least.
And I mean, we don't mean to sound desperate, but we are a little desperate here. There are a lot of people who are taking some time off, and we really support that and wholly. Um, we are here to help people, especially if they need to take a break. That's like 100%. We're down for that. Um, uh,
We have
the
more than
flip side of
12,
that,
Alana. We're just not the 24 yet.
um, and that's not to say that we have fewer than 24 submissions. We just have fewer than 24 um, top 24 submissions by unique contributors. And so, if one of your characters that you've submitted, if none of your characters that you've submitted are being listed as a top 24 eligible person, maybe you might want to reconsider that. Let us know. To that end, if you have any changes you want to make to your um characters, let us know about that as well. I know that I said that we'd probably be trying to get feedback to people this week. It's been a hell of a fucking week for both me and Faded and the rest of the committee. So that some of that feedback is coming, please don't be surprised if after the 8th we say, hey, we need more information about your person's college, or like what were they doing in their formative years. These questions are meant to help you create a stronger candidate. The main goal of this league is to create um, stories and artwork within the shared league. I know a lot of us are here for that, the basketball simulation, fantasy basketball portion, but keeping in mind that we're all here to tell stories. And if you are getting feedback from the committee regarding your upcoming player, that's coming from a place of care and really trying to help you develop your characters more thoroughly so that when the season comes, you'll be prepared to tell better stories with that character.
Yeah, like I said, we're gonna try and work on it. I broke out in hives last week, guys. So
Yeah.
I've been dealing with. They've got me on some medicine, trying to knock that down. That literally, I come home from work and feel like I'm about to pass out. So I have. Sorry, I've been kind of away the past week, and they're still not fully down yet, but I'm feeling a bit better now. So
Unrelated, sort of related to not being able to be in contact. I also have a new phone, just as a kind of an aside. So I know that my reception's been a little spotty in the last year or two. I am like fingers crossed, hoping that like I have the best phone in the fucking world now, and I'm hoping that will prevent any and all communication issues. Those of you who were trying to reach me were able to anyways, but um, I'm hoping that my own response time to people is going to be a little quicker in general, just as kind of an aside regarding communication. So, um, uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, I'm super tired, guys. Like I'm like extra rambly today, so poor Faded has to listen to me, and the rest of you guys do too. But
no, they can turn this off if they really wanted to.
well, I mean, they shouldn't. But
Not
yeah,
unless you
you're
turn them
right.
away.
They can step away for a little bit. Unfortunately, chained to pole in my basement. I mean,
Mm,
um, uh, moving on. I guess this one's me, and technically,
that's technically yes.
okay. We are going to be starting free agency in about a month. Again, we are aiming for September 1st, per usual, but we will announce if there are any delays due to the server transition. Um, uh, Mostly because the wiki is absolutely necessary in order to have free agency go off as as a process. So if there are delays in that, we'll let people know.
I don't know, Rookie. Remember the last website transfer? They did it on the forum.
Oh my God, don't even go there. No, so
No, we're not gonna do
we
that again. Hopefully.
we tried doing it through Google Forms 1 year. The last time, as Fed had said, that we had this is story time for the rookie, by the way. Last time we had the server transition, we it took longer than expected, so we used the forms, and that was just a nightmare for both players and for administration. So we're gonna do everything we can to avoid that. Um, but we're hoping that this server transition is a smooth one, and that September 1st is a feasible date. Um, until you hear otherwise, in short, expect that September 1st will be when free agency opens. Of course, with that having been said, the week prior, August 24th through the 31st, will be the renegotiation window. Um, so the way that this works, and this is a little confusing, and we're so happy to go over this anytime anyone has any questions about renegotiation. Um, Renegotiation can be initiated by two people, either the player itself or themselves, or the team. To be eligible for renegotiation, the player must have completed at least 2 years on their current contract and have 2 or more years remaining. So the example that we have here is Leanne Delmont, who is the pinnacle of athletic success, signs a 5-year deal in 2019 through 2020 free agency, and he's just completed 2 years and has three left. Basic math, right? So he can renegotiate if he so chooses. Any number of players can request renegotiation. However, a team can only force one player on their roster to renegotiate, and so that's the difference. Players who are eligible can request it during this window. A team cannot request more than one. That's not to say that they can't have more renegotiation occur, but they need, like, if it's team initiated, they're the ones they can only have one. Um, and then renegotiation basically means that they're voiding all the remaining years and money on the and immediately goes into free agency. This is why we have it happen the week before. It's easier to keep track of. You don't have to make that. You can make that decision beforehand, but you can't officially declare it until that weekend or until that week. Excuse me. And if you are renegotiating, whether you are a primary contact for a team or a player, you have to email both myself and Faded with your request to renegotiate. Please put in the subject title FBA and renegotiation. I know that's not on the slide, but FBA is the important part. Renegotiation is kind of the the important part probably for you, less important for us because we read everything that says FBA on it. Again, I'm rambling. Fada, please save me.
So, and kind of wrap it up, this is something we introduced back in the last lockout as kind of a way. This was back when we had 7-year contracts. Players were locked up far longer than they needed to be. This gives people an opportunity to get out of bad contracts if you're a team, and also as a player if they aren't happy with the situation that the team direction is going, they can always opt out, or if they feel like they're worth more money now, like a rookie signs a deal for only $10 million, like River. River just won his second ring, so after next season he may decide, hey, I've won 2 rings, pay me more. So he could renegotiate. I think he has a 4-year deal. Don't quote me on that, I think. However, that's the point of this. It's kind of like this basically acts, if you follow NBA, there are things called options on contracts, either player or team. This kind of serves as a team and player option combo to for anyone who thinks about it like that. If you sign a really long deal, it's basically acting as a 2-year contract with an option for another 2 years. So, rambling done. Moving on, team roleplay servers. So we are looking at potentially condensing the smattering of team roleplay servers to one server. Uh, as of now, we've kind of just left it up to the primary contacts if they want to make one and if there is one. But that also means that if you're on a bunch of teams, you may have like 5 or 6 or 7 roleplay servers, which can be kind of a pain to keep track of. And also, not everyone wants to join 1,000 servers. It also allows us to preserve the RP logs when new people take over the teams. It doesn't always happen necessarily, but sometimes if a person leaves, they may not hand over the admin rights to the new primary contact, and that could result in the server basically becoming dead, and all the RP logs not worth it, not able to be preserved. So basically, it also creates the RP space for those whose PCs maybe aren't as active and put in the work to actually like put a server together. And
So,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so this doesn't mean that everyone's gonna have suddenly have 24 new channels showing up in the FBA Discord. They're sort of gonna be set up kind of the same way that our community chat is set up, where it's if you're on a team that that server becomes
Visible.
available to you. And it's gonna kind of be self-serve in a way. So like as Faded said, the way that we've got the gender, or actually, I don't think he's gotten to this yet, but um,
I
uh,
have it up on screen.
we've we, you know, in the same way that we can assign roles with the gender pronouns on the main server, we're gonna do something very similar with the roles in terms of which teams you're on. Yes, this does mean that if you're not on a team, you can still request access to that team's roleplay. Um, we ask that if we end up going this route, um, you don't abuse that, or we may have to do everything manually. But this, honestly, this is the way that we've kind of thought that would be less work on Faded and I in terms of like getting every single individual person rights to every single channel. But we want you guys to have some autonomy as well, in terms of um, when you get drafted to a team, if you want to be involved in that team's sort of channel and role play or not. At the FBA has kind of always been a little bit choose your own adventure, and the reason why we're kind of moving in this direction is we want people to be more empowered to join these sort of channels at will.
Yeah, and basically the only management we would need to do is actually set who has team staff roles on it. And I'm looking into it, but I think I can set it up in a way that the team staff can edit within their own uh, channel
Yes.
and not edit anything else. So you would
Hmm.
basically still be able to create and rename chat rooms within your little subsection. Uh,
Yeah. Discord's a very robust tool, and um, we've used some of its abilities thus far, but we constantly are looking to increase the um, uh, its capabilities within our own server.
Yeah, and we're gonna keep it off of this server mainly because I think I can show you guys. I started working on something, uh, but can you imagine uh, all of these channels, me having and Roki and anyone who has access to all of them, having to scroll through them all? But like he was saying, if you're not on, for example, the Pittsburgh Keystones, you wouldn't be able to see the chat servers. This wouldn't even appear for you. So that's kind of the reason why it would be on a separate server, but it would be consolidating 24 teams worth of RP down to one server
Or
instead
maybe
of.
not. Like as I'm I might just argue with Faded about this later offline, but bring on the more channels. We must have the largest Discord in the Discord verse.
And then Discord like crashes because there's 50 bazillion channels I'm getting notifications for.
Not my server, not my problem. Oh
But
shoot, that is my problem.
it
That's
is.
for sure. Right.
My problems are very much your problems.
Yes.
And we might even add other role plays over there. Where I don't want to say we'd move completely off of having role play channels here, but having them over there might be more conducive, especially with events. Like I said, it's kind of this is a work in progress, and we'll continue to refine it.
Yeah. And then like like role play for like All-Star Week or the draft might also be on that server. Um, so it's definitely a conversation that we're going to continue. But we did want to share that with you guys to kind of get you uh used to the concept ahead of time so that when if rather if and when this happens, you're not entirely surprised by it.
We would prefer not to have team private RP chats if we're moving to this public one, mainly because it's to avoid. I mean, I can't stop you guys from having private. We can't stop you necessarily from having private RP chats, if especially if you're doing something specific with like three teammates and you want to have it in a controlled environment. But we're highly encouraging people to use this as a general chat RP room for the teams. It also makes it a lot easier for us to administrate if there are complaints. We have had to deal with bullying complaints in the past that took place on an RP server for a team, and it is definitely very difficult also as committee and commissioners to get an understanding of what the heck happened when we can't look at it. We have to rely on screenshots from someone who uh, has to
Who may have
trickle
a
them in.
biased opinion.
Yeah,
And but I mean that is a secondary benefit. Our primary goal, honestly, is to make sure that we like. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the FBA. There's a lot of like really great RP sessions and a lot of really great planning that happens. We want to be able to preserve some of that, and make it more accessible to other people. Um,
yeah. The loss
you know
of the
the
moving from Slack to Discord. I mean, I know Humiko was very upset about had to export a lot of roleplay logs, and when we have people changing teams, it's equally as possible that these servers get deleted or lost because of that.
Yeah. In some ways, this is a way for us to archive all of these great ideas and all of these great role plays. And it really just, you know, for someone who is just coming into the FBA and kind of seeing, okay, I've got my brand new first team. They can go back into those role plays. They can start digging through the history in a more concise way and a more efficient way than to be able to okay, well, I have to go here, and then I have to go here, and then I have to go there. What one of the goals for this year is making all of the history of the FBA more accessible to both old members and new members. Um, in an effort to say this is what we've done, this is what we're doing. Come join us, and at the same time, we want to encourage people to be able to build on that history. And if you can't find that history, you can't build on it. So this is a way that we've been discussing in order to kind of keep that living lore all in one place, so that, or at least mostly in one place, so that if you're looking something up, or if you want to be like, okay, this story came out, was there like a role play that this story came out of? Or it's really, again, trying to empower you guys to be able to have more of the basically the FBA at your fingertips is really what it comes down to.
I think Worky, it may be something he needs to touch on. He might have a bit of a better handle on what Discord can and can't do. Matt was asking about can we touch on what the current Team Discord should do then in regards to saving the data that's already been there, because it's not like we can necessarily export the chat logs um, from their server to our server. But I think there are ways to
Right.
archive download, but that might be something we touch on later.
That's an open conversation that we'll have to have for later. There are ways to kind of transfer one server to another, and mostly involving like like bots through Discord.
Yeah.
That's an option that we will definitely look into if that's something people want, um, for us to be able to try to accomplish. Some way or another, we will be able to preserve um, those servers. But that's a larger conversation than we have time for tonight.
How to do
That
that.
actually is more of a probably a like something that we could create like a task force, for, because within those servers you have to have at least one person willing to take to make those changes. And so we're kind of looking at 24 different, in theory, not quite in reality, because some teams don't have a server yet. And this is again another reason why I want to do this, is to provide these spaces for people to roleplay. Um, as I tangent off my tangent off my tangent, but really, like, think about it. Like, we have 24 teams. If they all have a different Discord, this is going to be a more coordinated effort than we can really get into tonight. but it is something that we will look into in terms of solutions of moving that data over. And to answer the just kind of Discord questions in general, we are taking suggestions for Discord improvements. Um, so we're constantly trying to make this a living, breathing mechanism, Humiku. So having those features like a dice bot or whatever, or a more robust um anything. Uh, those are all conversations that we can have as we uh, finalize the server change and then look back at the Discord to see, okay, we moved to a new wiki server. Now let's look at the Discord to see how that can improve. So that's a very, very, very rookie, long-winded way of saying we are not opposed to making improvements to this Discord or a roleplay Discord if that comes up in order to better serve you guys as an organization.
Yeah. And moving on to the next one, we have a little update about Hovo work if you want to go over it.
Sure. So we've been talking with both TC and Blades, who have been given control of the Hobo agency. Um, and we know that there are many people in the league who either involved directly or indirectly with Hovo. So we thought it would be wise to at least touch base on this. Um, the two of them are currently working on making some changes to the agency. They're still working out the in-canon logistics of it, but the very, very, very overview um, uh, uh, like high level versions that the new owners are Rudy Aquino and Danica Rogers. Um, there will be some downsizing due to inactive characters being represented, um, partly because Luke Hopper, Vincent Voss, and Thea no longer work there. Um, and they also want us to kind of just mention that they are willing and wanting to add more contributor agents um, to the organization to kind of make it more of a living, breathing um, sister organization to the FBA. So if anyone is interested in kind of joining uh, uh, as an agent on top of everything else that's going on, you're more than welcome to contact them if you are interested in doing so.
Yeah, like I said, they have some. They're working on the changes. I know in our discussion, I think they mentioned that there's going to be like an east and a west branch, so that it's more conducive for agents and players to have role play events, so that you're not flying all the way across the country just to meet with your agent. So, like I said, they're working on that now. It's obviously working out the in canon story behind it all is not necessarily something that can just be snapped into life. So it'll be in work progress. But like I said, TC and Blades are both working on that. And if you have any questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer if they can. Like I said, it's a work in progress right now.
But we recognize that a lot of people want to see Hobo continue as an agency within the FBA canon universe, and we are as an administrative team willing to let that occur within this kind of partnership, as it were.
Yep. And we are going to move on. Like I said, that revamp, rebranding, whatever they end up going through, will make any announcements because it is affecting canon. There are a number of players that are represented by some of those agents that are taking over. I know they said that they'll be making announcements regarding if they're having to kind of cut representation for any inactive players. But we're going to dive into now the suggestions slash changes. These are more broad topics that are either we're just going to mention because either they aren't necessarily something we're going to vote on now, but something to start thinking about. Slash, they're things that we don't need a vote for that we want to implement just at the right time. Is
Yeah,
that
so this whole section that we're going to go through is either things that require a large discussion kind of before we really implement them, or things that really we feel don't necessarily need voting on. Um, uh, we've gotten a lot of really great suggestions from all of you, but so we want to kind of implement some of those suggestions almost immediately, or at
uh,
least address them
yeah,
here.
and that's actually the first thing we want to talk about. League expansion was brought up in the anonymous suggestion form. And for anyone who's not aware what this means, this refers to increasing the number of teams in the FBA. Currently, we field 24 FBA level teams. If we did an expansion, basically you would add them in pairs, so not to have uneven conferences. So, for example, you'd have a 26, 28, 30, etc. You wouldn't want to have an odd number conference against an even number. It wouldn't necessarily be as fair. I know in the NBA, I think they've done it before, but they really do like to add them in pairs to avoid that. Now, the main barrier to doing something like this is participation. Uh, as we talked about with the draftee discussion, for every team there needs to be 2 draft submissions in order to replace the players as they retire. Now, right now the draft class is a minimum of 48, and we haven't reached that yet now. So if we did want to go through an expansion, we would need to have more consistent draft classes of a size necessary to do that. So that's kind of the main barrier. And if people really want to see the league do an expansion to have more teams, we need to start seeing draft classes of, this last year we did great. We had, I think, 64 submissions. We ended up approving 60 of them because we knew uh, that would have been a fair number of undrafted free agents that may not have been picked up by a team. So if we see, those 60 draftees a couple years in a row, then the justification for an expansion becomes viable in terms of we have enough contributors contributing characters to make it work. And this last year is not something that we've accomplished that in. So that's kind of why we're not leaning towards allowing an expansion for at least a couple years.
Right. And guys, just so you know, like some of these things that we're talking about are addressing suggestions that were sent to us by the league. These are not necessarily things that we are suggesting. These are things that we are more reacting to. So we a lot of people are saying in the chat right now, this is definitely not the time for expansion. We agree right now. It's not. We don't see this next upcoming year being a year for expansion for obvious reasons. But everything that we're kind of addressing in this section are direct responses to either the suggestion form or the list um, that you guys provided to us. So this isn't necessarily things that we feel that we thought needed to be in the meeting more so than we want to make sure that there were suggestions that
Mm-hmm.
we want to address at this time
Yeah,
is
and
really what this section's about.
like I said, this is again people have kind of commented that they don't feel like they're heard, so we're definitely trying to make sure that this was brought up as a suggestion, and we're kind of explaining why at the moment we can't do it, and what we kind of need to see it to get to where it needs to be to do it. Because I would love to move up to a 30 team league. It would actually make it easier for simulations and creating schedules. Because a lot of you can
Oh
just
gosh, yes.
the, most of them don't allow custom team sizes like this, and different engines become available for things. I could actually put this into 2K and have 30 teams. Like I said, there are advantages to expanding, but until we get the number of players and again like a primary contacts, and again, as we mentioned earlier, we want only one primary contact per team preferred. So, like I said, that's just we wanted to talk about this because this does, I think Matt mentioned, it comes up about every year, and I mean, it's not a terrible idea if we want to see the league grow. It's just we haven't
We
had the consistency in draftees to make it viable.
and this is why outreach is so important. We need people to tell their friends. If you're enjoying your time here in the FBA, bring a friend along. Tell them, hey, we've got our draftees are being accepted right now. It's there are a lot of people who have been veterans here for a long time. Um, you know, those things that keep you here and keep you sticking with us and keep you involved in the league. Bring a friend. Tell someone, hey,
Kidnap a roommate.
this is yeah, or a roommate. um, I personally am running out to tell. Uh, but um, if everyone listening right now invited one friend, then a league expansion could definitely be plausible for next year. Right now, as it stands, we you know we're we're we need to have more. We need to see more growth in the membership of the league before we're able to expand the league's teams.
Mm,
Um, is really what it comes down to.
yeah. And moving on to playoffs.
So one thing that we wanted to kind of consider, and this isn't a conversation like so I full disclosure, I expect that we're probably gonna have at least one more like full FBA season, or excuse me, full FBA organizational wide meeting around the time when uh the draft combine is starting, just so that we can start to address some of these things. Um but this is something to think about for a future conversation. Is do we want to change how the playoffs are run, or do we want to keep as they've been? One of the suggestions that we received was to revamp the playoffs, kind of in the same way that the
I'm
NBA
sorry,
has
I'm
been
seeing
making their
JW,
changes.
JW calling out no playing games.
um, and this is where the conversation comes in. There are benefits to both. Um, right now, as it stands, um, we have 16 out of 24 teams make the playoffs. One option is these playing games that J, JW is clearly against, for the lower seeds. Um, but if we do that, then you know we would consider reducing the amount of teams that make the playoffs if that's the route that we go. We could also reduce the number of playoff teams to 12, with the top two seeds getting an automatic bye. Um, and then, of course, we can also reseed the teams like the WNBA, where the lowest seed faces the highest remaining, and so on and so forth. So there are ways to look at this. Um, you know, Again, we're bringing this up because somebody suggested it, and so we do want to kind of consider it as an option. If as a league we decide that the way that the playoffs are um, currently the best way to do it, then so be it. Again, this is all about turning things into more of a conversation than just
Hmm.
making arbitrary decisions. And if people feel that there need to be changes, we want to be able to hear that.
Yeah, again, this is just someone made a suggestion in the forum that maybe uh, revamp the playoffs because again, the NBA has done it, the WNBA has done it. I mean, we don't have to follow it. That's fine. But basically, Alana, the way that the playing games worked was instead of having the top 8 teams get in, they had the top 6 teams guaranteed, and then they had the 7th through 10th seeded teams do essentially what are called play-in games, where they had to win at least one game to make it into the playoffs. I think that's how it's going. Basically, it's kind of like the college basketball where they added extra games where you had to win a game before you could even make it to the playoffs. As Vesta mentioned, it's basically regarding uh, making up some lost money slash there have been complaints in the NBA about how the seating has worked. I personally don't like it, but I can appreciate if the community wanted to go a different route with the playoffs. Again, maybe reducing the number of teams because we do have 16 out of 24 teams make the playoffs, which is a lot. That basically means 2/3 of the teams always make the playoff. Whereas in the
Right.
NBA, I think it's 16 out of 30 teams. So
Well,
you have a lot
and
more
and one of the
missed.
reasons why we're doing it, sorry to cut you off,
Yeah,
Faded,
good.
is we do want to, and you guys have kind of mentioned this in the chat a little bit. We do want to try to include as many people as possible, but also just keeping in mind that the reality of the playoffs is that, you know, we have 24 teams. Only one team is going to win the finals, and so along that playoffs road. Um, you've got 15 teams that will fall off the trail, plus another 8 teams that don't make it into the playoffs in the first place. So, we've tried in the past, and we're still trying to figure out how to balance that, you know, uh, making sure that everyone has a kind of a fair chance, but at the same time recognizing that in the end it's kind of like Highlander, there can only be one. um, and we've said it in the past, 1 out of 24, that means that, less than 5% of the players in the FBA become FBA champions for that year. So just, it becomes a back and forth struggle a little bit, but we do ask people to keep in mind that there is, there is an expectation that most people who are going throughout the season will not end up with a ring.
Yeah, and again, we just wanted to bring this up. Someone had mentioned it, and you guys might have a really great idea about how we could make the playoffs maybe more engaging for people in terms of how, uh, if again, how we want to do like if we wanted to see uh, the playoff chase be a little bit more contentious. I mean, it tends to be the middle of the pack is where the biggest battle is. So that would make the playoff chase a little bit more exciting necessarily. But again, that also means less players making the playoffs. So it's a give and take. So just something to think about. This is not something we're going to vote on now. This is something to we want people to start thinking about and consider. Hey, maybe I would like to see change to how the playoff system is run. And here's my idea. Um, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and like, playoffs have always been kind of a sticky situation because we get out of regular season play and into the knockout tournament. So
You
just
know what?
again
One
keeping in
game,
mind.
only one game series, no more 7 game series. And that's another
Yeah,
thing, guys. You can make suggestions like that, like, hey, maybe we want to see no 7 game series anymore and make it reduced to 5 or 3. Give it a little bit more randomness. I mean, it doesn't have to be just in terms of changing how many teams make the playoffs, but also allow reducing the number of games in the series to give a little bit more advantage to those upset teams.
yeah.
So
So again, this isn't we're not necessarily discussing this. We're more addressing these suggestions that came. It is something that we can discuss and would like to discuss at some point, though. Um, and you guys are talking a little bit in the comments. I love the idea of 13 teams as taking a court at once. Um, that's a very what is that, the football um art piece, 12 12,226 of you, I think, uh of just having as many teams as possible on the court at all times. Um, or whatever that piece is. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask me about it later, and I will submit it to you at some point. Yeah, Takeshi's challenge, but the FBA. Exactly. All right. Moving on to uh,
My
the
slide.
next slide here.
So another suggestion we had was private slash high team roster rotations. So currently, anyone can look and see what a roster rotation is for each team is set to. In theory, this can give an advantage to those who are able to make last minute changes in an attempt to counter the strategy of another team. Basically, if they see that so and so, let's say Bangor for whatever or Seattle for whatever reason is playing Leon at shooting guard, maybe they make a change to put their best defender at shooting guard, uh, and then Seattle sees that and moves him back to point guard at the very last minute. Like I said, that technically can happen. I don't know how much it does, but the suggestion that someone was making was trying to hide and make the rosters private to avoid something like that. And I like this idea. I do. Uh, it's just currently I don't know how to do it outside of Google Sheets, and that's something the UFFL does. Um, it's just that the way they do it, I'd have to figure out some way to export all the settings from 24 Google Sheets to a primary sheet that then I copy directly into the engine. That I don't know if is possible immediately offhand. I think the way that they do it in the UFFL is they actually manually enter the data for each game, and that is viable for them because they do one game a week. That's not viable for me doing one set of games every day.
Every day,
Yeah,
yeah.
this could be 2 to 3 hours potentially of me just copying and pasting everything. I'm sure I could get it down to under an hour, but that's still an hour a day for 190 plus days of games. It
So kind of to address this, the way that Stevie used to do this before I was the commissioner, and then before faded so graciously, decided to accept helping me out with being co-commissioner, is that he would always let home team have the last change, which I think was fair. But even still, there really weren't that many instances where people would go back a bunch of times. I mean, there was sort of kind of an unspoken, like, guys, just be cool rule here. I know that we're all here. Um, like like in the sake of good sportsmanship, we are asking that you try not to over abuse this situation. Um, we will eventually look into whether this is a feasible change to make. We're both Vade and I are not opposed to this change. We recognize why the suggestion was made, and we agree that having it private isn't necessarily a bad thing, but like he said, because of the frequency of games, and because it just how quickly these changes need to be made, um, there is some sort of, like, uh ask on our part as commissioners to you guys to, like, say the reason why it's set up is so that we can get the results out to you quicker, and so that we're not constantly bogged down. And I say we, it's Faded does the lion's share of the game posting. So total recognition of in that part. But I like Faded, and you guys should like Faded too. And giving him like 2 hours worth of extra work, just because you can't stop looking at your opponent's team roster and making changes. I mean, we're let's let's be a little more sportsmanlike here. And yes, you can go and check your other team, like the other team's rosters, but just be cool about
Yeah,
it.
and I mean part of the reason Homiku is that yeah, I would say this falls under um, being don't be a dick, but at the same time it's really hard to prove, and it just kind of creates that um, I don't want to say resentment, but like paranoia of did they make that change because they were trying to counter what I was doing, or did they make that change organically? And I mean, at this point, I don't think we have people doing that. I don't. If that is a concern that is out there, I'd rather address it so that it isn't a concern, um, and so that people do have that peace of mind knowing, okay, I don't have to worry about it. Um, and it might be possible for us to set up permissions in some way on the website. It's just I can't experiment that, and Rookie can't experiment with that until we get the new server up. And it might not be possible that way, but it could be. Like I said, it's in the air right now. What is possible? I know one way of doing it, but I don't think it is a feasible way of doing it for what we need, and that's the Google Sheets.
Without putting undue strain on Faded is really what it comes down to. Because we love the snap. We want him to continue um, being loved, and asking him to do more work is not a way to do that.
And I think going back to Delta's point of how much does it really matter, and it really probably doesn't matter too much. And honestly, it also could argue that since you guys can't make changes mid-game, that you could argue that it's equivalent to making a mid-game adjustment. You see that they're playing a player in a different position, so you make an adjustment because of that. It's more so just because I am very consistent at getting games out around 4. Uh, Someone can take advantage of that, and if they're not working at that time, they can always be available to make adjustments where someone may not always be able to make adjustments. So, like I said, we've talked this a little bit to death, but it's something that we like it. We'll get to it hopefully and see if it's feasible. Until then, please just don't do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to wiki suggestions. So we did get a lot of suggestions for the wiki, and we will do our best to make these changes as feasible as they are once we move to the new server. One of the just so you guys know and understand, one of the reasons why we're moving to this new server is so that we can upgrade to a better version of MediaWiki. Currently, one of the reasons why we haven't upgraded is because the awful web hosting that I got that was really great like 6 years ago, and just has been gone down the tubes. Uh, does not support um, current MediaWiki stuff. Um, and so there's a lot of extensions that are available to us that should be available to us that aren't because we can't upgrade the wiki. And this is this goes into many reasons why we're moving servers. But looking at these suggestions for the wiki, we're going to do our best to implement them as much as we can. The first is making a wiki search bar not that is not case sensitive. We might be looking into like we're gonna see if there's an extension for this. But again, contingent on whether the new server allows it. More information for story/art submissions in terms of like metadata and stuff like that. Um, so we think that it should be possible to edit the template so that there are categories for teams/seasons within story and art submissions. We do want we agree that this is a useful function, but we want to be able to see what the new versions of MediaWiki will support in terms of adding those tags and that metadata. So great idea. We'll see if it's feasible given the technology that we have.
Well, we will
Um,
have.
yes, yes. Uh, there's been a suggestion for a central wiki hub for important leagues within the league. We're willing to examine this once we have that new server up and running. Um, Legacy history. Um, there's been some suggestions to have like a central location to introduce new contributors to kind of like the highlights of the league history and the major storylines. Um, the right now the we do have the technological framework and the sort of like history framework uh, already in place to do this, but it's going to take some time and some one person power, excuse me, to um to really get that off the ground. So it's less so much of a technology issue in this case, so much as a like it's this is this is a large ask, and we'll need uh some donated hours and some dedicated time to really make sure that happens if this is something people want us to create. Um, and then finally, we are working on updating the staff resource page, and uh, uh, Delta has been so integral and helpful in working on updating our staff resource page so that it is more, quite frankly, more usable to the primary contacts, to both new and old contributors alike. Um, and we thank her so much for the work that she's put into it already. We are looking to make that more of a useful tool for people in the coming seasons.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a bunch of other little things. I've talked about getting the team pages all updated. Like I said, there's lots of little things that need to get done. They can add up very quickly in terms of how many, fur hours you have to put into it to get it done. Moving on to the Hall of Fame. So this is something that kind of got brought up multiple times, and uh, again, not right now, but we're going to work on trying to set up some kind of procedure to deal with retired players and NPCs and how they can be added to the Hall of Fame. In the past, we've kind of just typically allowed people to create NPCs so long as their backstory made sense. So, for example, it often was, Jake Turner's mom was a Hall of Fame player. That makes sense for his storyline and the accomplishments she made as that player earned made sense adding her to the Hall of Fame. And we really only step in if someone made a Hall of Fame character and said, yeah, so and so's dad played one season and was so great that he was a Hall of Famer, which for the most part no one has done as far as I know. But
Well, I mean, Lucas Burger Kane's dad was, in a couple of years there, and as a EFBL coach, he clearly needs to make the Hall of Fame, right?
sure. So we're gonna look into how we can do this, and especially now that we have actual players that have, I think Vesta made a comment that we only have 10, 11 years of in character stuff going on in the league, and you think about that, 11 years in the league is a long time, and that's players reaching retirement that arguably could be Hall of Famers. And what's the process for that? Is there a process? And Matt has volunteered to kind of look into and sit down with a few of the people who are interested in brainstorming ideas, so that later this year we can actually bring it up to the community and provide different proposals. Because there are a lot of ways you could do. You could have a Hall of Fame committee that votes on if someone gets into the Hall of Fame, like Major League Baseball. We could have it as a community-wide vote. We could have it as committee picks. Uh, we could have it as is, where NPCs and people just are allowed to declare themselves Hall of Famers as long as it makes sense. Like I said,
Yeah.
there are a lot of ways of doing it, and this is a bigger discussion than what can be had in one single night.
Right. So, and a lot of these, we do want to have sort of mini discussions, like anyone who's willing and interested in these sorts of changes or developments. Um, we will be trying to I don't want to say like the word I want to use is subcommittees, but that's not correct in the grand schema of things. But groups that are interested in developing these um
Think tanks.
yeah, think tanks are great. That's perfect word. in trying to get these developments and suggestions off the ground, um, are going to be integral in the next year or so, as we try to implement more of these that people have sent to us. Because we all at the same time we don't like, for instance, the Hall of Fame. We don't want that just to be a committee thing. We don't want that, like, whatever the current committee is, gets to decide the Hall of Fame, and that's that. Like, we want it to be more of a discussion.
Yeah, and that also, adding one more thing for committee to have to do voting on top of, draftees, all those other fun
Exactly.
things. So, moving on, since it has been over an hour already.
Okay. We'll try to speed this along a little more than we have been. So one thing that has come up a couple times is the balance of the current engine. This is my yearly reminder to you guys that A, the engine is always a work in progress. B, Faded did a phenomenal job of revamping a lot more feasible and realistic than it had been in previous years. And C, we can't make changes to the engine mid-season because that would not be fair to anyone, in terms of both teams and individual players. So once we start the season, up until the last preseason game um, is played, we can still make those tweaks and changes, and this is partly why those preseason games are so important, because it does allow us to kind of like make sure that we are kind of where we want to be in terms of engine balance. But that also means that things are not perfect yet, and it's always kind of a give and take regarding the engine balance. This year, in particular, the the assisted turnover ratio was a bit high for point guards, um, because it doesn't really consider how often the PG has the ball and compared to the rest of the team. Um, this kind of resulted in the fact that even though point guards typically have a higher passing dribbling skill by proxy of having the ball more often to start plays, they're all also more likely to have turnovers. And so that's just one example of things that we're looking to fix um in the off season. And again, like it's always a give and take. We're aiming for the more epic side of realism, to help aid these stories, and furries are a little more athletic in ways, shapes, and forms than humans might be, but we still want to keep things in a realistic realm of possibility. And so it's a constant battle with these, um, with this balance.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just, again, something that you go looking back, comparing to previous NBA, and obviously the NBA has its own uh, meta, quote unquote. I think as MW was mentioning, that it's a small ball game, and that's not necessarily the direction we want to go. So I can't uh, mimic the league 100%, but to some level, trying to. We have a data source that I can try to match, so that's helpful. Uh, that's the goal.
Uh,
But like I said, the
moving
preseason game gets everything going. Sorry, I was referring to Sam made a comment about Leonard Mack hitting like 90% threes, and yeah, hang on. Yeah, and Vesta. I mean, I guess really quick. I guess if you want to answer, talk about Vesta, bringing up the point of non-playoff teams having an unhealthy stigma. I definitely know what you're talking about in that regard. Um, I haven't been able to. I've done it in the past for teams where I actually looked at how many contracts they offered versus when they offered them, because sometimes remembering how you offered versus everyone else. There have been years where players tended to stay with their teams for less money versus leaving their teams for more money, or even just leaving their teams. Period. And like you definitely mentioned, Plymouth having that stigma for a while, being a basement team, but was able to rebound pretty quickly, and it can be tough to break that stigma. I don't know necessarily how we can uh, break people of that because it's a subconscious thing. Um, Obviously, top-rated rookies tend to go to those teams because they're in the basement, so they have a higher draft pick. Um, I think maybe bringing in new staff might be helpful for those teams. I think you were doing a great job with Texas, honestly, Vesta. I think you've put them on a great track to do better year after year. I obviously know that's also extremely frustrating to be in that situation where you have a team that is struggling and it can't seem to turn around. And Rourke left me, of course. So I wish I knew a way to break that stigma because unfortunately it's very much like in real life where there are teams that everyone makes fun of the Nets for being the Nets and the Knicks for being the Knicks. Um, so it's kind of an unfortunate uh, self-fulfilling prophecy at times. And other than forcing people to go to those teams, which would kind of be the antithesis of what we want as a organization to allow people to be creative with their characters. And at the same time, it is extremely difficult. And of course, I'm going to start rambling now because Rourke has left me. Oh, nope, he's back.
I'm back.
So I don't know if you kind of caught that with Vesta. If you had anything to add, maybe.
I think you pretty much covered it.
Yeah, like I said, other than doing drastic changes, I don't know. And I mean, I don't know. I've always had plans. I always like to think about like, hey, what if I had this team? How would I try and pull them out of the basement? But a lot of it is getting contributors to come to your team, and if they don't feel comfortable coming to the team for reasons, it's difficult.
You kind of have to like make things um like you have to make yourself and your team accessible in a way. And some of that comes down to yes, you'll have the ability for a couple of years, you'll have that ability to get like the better draftees, but you really also have to kind of make yourself approachable as a primary contact, and really like you know be willing to like there's a certain responsibility to cultivate your team, and and that's more than just getting people to your team. It's about like helping to develop stories. It's about maybe creating like role play nights. There's so much that you can do to draw that talent to your team. Um,
And sometimes you're just unlucky. I mean, you could have a number one overall pick, like the Plymouth Taproots, not happy on the team and decides to demand a trade. And
yeah,
there's nothing you could have done about it, unfortunately. And all you have to do is be able to roll with it. And it is really tough. I mean, again, the only one team is going to win every year, and even then, it sucks being in the basement. I 100% agree. I know some people actually like to take that challenge of trying to turn that kind of team around. Um, and I definitely encourage people if that's the challenge you want to go for, apply for those teams if they are in the basement and you want to try changing how they make things move forward.
mhm. And we've empowered Alana mentions PC primary context as story makers have kind of fallen off in recent years, and I'll double down on that. We have empowered primary contact to be able to use their teammates and the members on their teams to be able to tell the story of that team. And there is some responsibility when you take on that team as a primary contact that you're going to cultivate it in some way, shape, or form. And however that form is kind of up to you a little bit. But you need to be working to develop the lore for that team. And quite often, like I've seen it many years in a row now. teams that don't work to cultivate that lore, people that sort of just run their team and don't really like do anything for the team, are often the teams that have trouble uh, attracting active contributors because they're not providing that sort of infrastructure or support that contributors need to develop those stories. And it's a little bit of a give and take. You know, the more that you provide those story opportunities for the players on your team, the more the contributors on your team will want to um, contribute in some way, shape, or form. You know, I there's not to toot my own horn, but when I was a primary for Albany, one of the things that I would try to do often, and this is just a suggestion for people to take or leave it however they want, is you know once a month I'd say, hey, there's a team activity going on. You know, is your player there? What are they doing? Here's kind of like the 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 bare bones outline of what's going on. Play in the structure, and there are so many other things that you can do with those teams. But if you are not doing your due diligence as a primary contact, and we understand that like some people like things come up and people don't necessarily like people who thought they might have time to do so and suddenly don't. That's one thing. But you really need to like we're looking for in these primary contacts people who are willing to put the effort in, and you know it people can tell. You know, you'll the more effort you kind of put into supporting your team, the more people will want to be involved.
Yeah, and I want to wrap this up and kind of move on, but I think you've generally covered it. I mean, again, people sometimes treat this as a game, and it's also stories on top of that. So you could sign the best player you think there is in the league, but if they're an inactive player, they may not be as good as you thought they were, you know, after a year or two. Whereas, you know, someone from the draft who's super active may suddenly become one of the better players in the league. Uh, like I said, it's a give and take. We try and balance the level of gaming versus story. But let's move on before we're here till 3 a.m. I'm sorry, if you had any last thing you wanted to say, Roki, before we move on.
You know, that's it.
Okay. One of the comments that was kind of made, suggestions were up, was the injury rate. Um, and that they felt like there was an increase in the playoffs. So in the 948 games, that's excluding any sports dens because 2K games have injuries turned off. During the regular season, there were 269 injuries, which basically accounts, and that injuries means day to day or worse. Um, a day injury does not count towards this statistic. This basically is just looking at the injury log. So that's an injury every 2.83 games. So basically, every 4 games, you'd expect to have an injury. In the 89 game playoffs, excluding the finals, because again, those were in the 2K, there were 30 injuries, which was 0.337 for every game. So it was higher. It was about a game injury every 3 games versus every 4 games. Now, there is a problem with this is that the sample size is so small compared to the regular season. You're talking about 1/10 essentially of the sample size for this, comparing the two. And if we look at the regular season rate, we should have expected about 25 to 26 injuries, taking 89 times 0.283, and that's about 25 to 26. So really, we only had 4 or 5 more injuries occur, which, if you think about it, in a sample size this small, could have come from just having 1 or 2 games have more injuries. And it could also be explained that I didn't get a chance to really break down the entire leagues, how hard they were pushing their teams, but if you pushed your starters and top bench more with a more aggressive lineup, it's possible injuries would occur more often, and also the fact that We had more overtime games in the playoffs compared to the regular season, and in overtime games, you're more likely to have injuries because more minutes are being played. So those 4 or 5 injuries are possible from the low sample size, uh, more minutes being put on less players, and also having more overtime games.
And
So
as a lot of people are seeing in the chat, like it makes sense that more people are going to get injured during the playoffs. Like we didn't necessarily plan it this way, but from a story perspective, like you've these are teams that have played 80 games already. They're moving into their they're already exhausted from the regular season, and they're being pushed harder by their coaches. Someone's going to get hurt more often
yeah,
from a story perspective.
and this is just again someone had mentioned it and they wanted to know if there was a difference in the injury rate versus the regular season, and no, there was no intended change. I've thought about adding a progressive fatigue. I've just not been able to figure out a way to easily implement it so that it's both understandable to everyone else as well as displaying it.
Fair.
So it's I just don't there was no change in the injuries really. Yes, if you look at it bluntly as the .33 versus .28, there was an increase, but with how small the sample size was and the other factors, I there really wasn't a difference in terms of the number of injuries.
To
Just
answer the question that's actually been being asked here, between the lines, we did not change the engine for the playoffs in terms of injury rate. What the coaches and primary contacts did for their teams may have changed, but we did not intentionally increase the possibility of injuries based on engine statistics.
yeah, and I mean it's just how it is. Unfortunately, in terms of the injuries, I mean there's some voting suggestions coming later that might impact how injuries happen, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
So moving on, we're
yeah,
there's been a little bit of discussion about the EFBL. Jay Wolf has volunteered to work on organizing some of the international basketball scene. Um, uh, the European Furry Basketball League is the most well known of the international organizations, but there are other leagues around the world that contribute um, that contributors have questions about, and kind of what we want to do. And this is something that Jay Wolf is looking to drive, is to have a more organized and like kind of detailed look at the international basketball scene to help with character creations and storylines. Um, what and a benefit of this, not certainly not the only benefit of this, is to help conflicting canon of multiple teams claiming victory in these leagues over time. Um, I think I personally I think having someone kind of to be the point person for international league play is a good idea. Um, so we appreciate Jay Wolf volunteering to step up to do this. If only for the fact that it keeps our canon a little more clean. And so we this is again we're in the section that is kind of up for thought slash discussion in the future. So um we will be working with Jay Wolf um to try to make international leagues more accessible to the rest of you all, as well as encouraging you to play around with the canon of these leagues, because there is a lot of potential there. If you're looking for something different than just saying a basketball player coming out of college in some mid-state university, as it were.
yeah, and I'm actually going to get on that into a little bit. MW, what you just brought up about the Twitter RP. But moving on from the EFB, I mean that's kind of a general, that's something we're going to work on. The international scene has kind of just been left up to question. I know back in the day, um, we had someone running specifically the EFBL, but that kind of fell off when they left. Not necessarily looking to have games being simmed, but just general guiding storylines and helping people create those kind of storylines. Um, and moving on to the D League, which is actually something Jay Wolf had done in the past, and took a break this last off season. And the main problem with that was because the D League was facing um, not having enough players to survive. The way it had been working was any undrafted players went unsigned and in the restricted free agency were sent to the D League in hopes to avoid the character just kind of being forgotten and tossed away because I mean they weren't being seen anymore. So that's kind of where the D League came around was hey, this is a developmental league, you can still role play your characters and they'll get signed by the FBA eventually to join. And this worked when we had classes of 70, and it was often 12 to 10 players went unsigned. And Kit has volunteered to take this up after JW is moving kind of on to the European scene. And he's kind of been talking about us with the committee about revamping the D League and maybe reimagining it more so by using fillers. Uh, I know the UFFL uses this with their players because a football team needs a lot more players than a basketball team. But basically, the D League may end up being something like, and this is still a work in progress, but it may be something like, okay, we have a bunch of filler characters that can't be signed by FBA teams, but let's say we have someone join mid-season and they want to create a character, but the draft is 8 months away, and we end up losing those contributors, unfortunately. So this gives them an opportunity to kind of take possess, as a ghost, enter the body of this filler character and maybe rename them, maybe give them a backstory, kind of create a narrative with them that can then be signed by an FBA team. And that way a contributor can immediately jump into the league and actually be invested sooner rather than having to wait 8 months for the draft.
And this goes back to like how we can, get people involved immediately. We dabbled a little bit in this in previous years, but we really want to like kind of double down on this commitment. Um, uh, in terms of helping people kind of get a taste for the FBA mid-season as opposed to, having to wait until July or August to really start to get their feet wet, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, we had tried something similar to this with the draftees. We were letting people create D leaguers ahead of time, and the D League just itself not having enough players, and that kind of is the conundrum with going way back to the expansion idea. The D League essentially is an expansion. It's just it can have fillers and not necessarily be a problem. It's just it suffers more when there aren't enough draftees to kind of fill it, which is why moving to a more filler because that was the biggest problem with JW. I think at one point he had shooting guards and small forwards playing power forward and center because there were none of them. So it was a very complicated way to make the engine actually work for
Yep.
him. But yeah, that's kind of again on the way, on the horizon potentially. It will definitely be a more beneficial for new contributors, more so than regular older contributors that already have investments in the league.
But
Uh,
it will also allow people, like if you're a primary contact, we recognize that the D League is important in terms of filling those extra spots at after the draft when you've got like you've got 12 people on your team and because you've got five people who retired, and you already picked up an extra draft slot, but you're still back up to the very bare minimum. You want to have like that extra one or two players. We recognize from an administrative function that that's useful. And so, I think having that D League is important in that respect. Um, and we appreciate that Kit is willing to step up and make sure that we have that pool of extra players to draw from both a new contributor standpoint and for those primary contacts looking to fill their rosters.
Yep. And moving on to seasonal summaries.
Right. So someone suggested that we summarize the FBA season, partly as a way to get new contributors to understand of what has happened slash what's currently going on. Um, the reality of the situation is that summarizing a whole season with over 300 players, over 100 contributors on Discord is not really an easy task. Um, People are more or less great at summarizing what they know. Given the size of the league, areas are definitely going to be limited. We need a wide range of people to accomplish something like this, um, as well as it again like there is a um, kind of where how do you cultivate that? Like how do you determine what to put in what and what to leave out? It becomes kind of a logistical nightmare in that respect. Um, Another option that was kind of proposed was maybe focusing on summaries at a player and team level, which we feel like could be a more feasible goal. Um, we are working on getting all pages updated, um, because when you're looking a little more granularly at um, uh, the teams, they only have like 12 to 15 players plus their NPCs, so it's easier for the people involved in the team to create a season summary for that team that is a little more comprehensive within that that scope. Um, and so that's kind of the compromising that we're proposing, and some of you have started with that and started kind of looking at your team pages, which we are utterly and eternally grateful for that you were able to do that. Again, the wiki is closed right now, so
Don't do
being
it.
able to do that like we don't want to stop you from working on those things. You just can't post them. So if you want to kind of like work on updating your team pages, create a Word doc, start building those histories or those summaries to update your team pages with. And once we open back up, you're welcome to update as you see fit. Um, but we do feel that the doing it on a team level a little more granular than league wide is probably the way to go in that respect.
And honestly, and I think I'm going to touch on this in like the next slide, but it doesn't even necessarily come down to the PCs doing it. It's if people on the team, it only takes probably two or three people on a team to have a good comprehension of what happened on the team that year to put together a summary and just have the PC check it off, say yep that's good, and have it put on the wiki page. It's all about making things bite-sized chunks, and a league-wide summary, you either have to include it all or you have to be selective. And how are you selective? And how many, again, meetings upon meetings upon meetings of, okay, we include this story because it's a major storyline, or am I being biased because my character was involved in this storyline? Um,
And what's
versus,
major for your characters might not be major for the league necessarily.
yeah. And so that's what kind of where the team level. I mean, almost any story with a character is important for a team. I mean, how a player reacts and performs because of a situation. Again, uh, I believe a number of players who've had kids in the past year. You know, that's something that's very important on a player level and maybe even within the team level, but that might not be something that's necessarily considered important at a league level. So that can be missed then if it's not being included in team or player level pages. So that's kind of where uh, I would consider uh, having it at team level is valuable in that regard. And plus, that way, people can kind of look on the team pages and see the progression of the story of the team through the years. And maybe
And this
go ahead.
and this kind of goes back to why we're looking at like creating a central RP server for these teams. You know, one of the things that we encourage people to do when they start the FBA is that there is a lot of lore, and then we tell them flat out, you know, look at the teams that are available, look at kind of the teams that 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 we have, and pick one or two of them, and then slowly kind of build out your knowledge of the FBA from there. And this goes hand in hand with that, you know, having that ability to follow a team's history back through the years is is integral to understanding that team's journey.
And it also is a great way to provide a. We talked about central hub earlier, but having a branching hub for players and their stories, you can link stories very easily with the media wiki to a the submitted page, so you could have the team summary, have the stories woven in when you're talking about like uh, Lance Wildfire retiring at the end of the year. Maybe if Rookie has a story made for that, it's included as a hyperlink in that summary. So if someone wants to go read it, all they have to do is click on it right there from the team summary, and it takes them straight to that storyline. Or maybe there's some kind of art referencing a uh, what you're saying in the summary, and again, you can have a link directly taking you to that art that you're referencing. Uh, you can having the team pages be central hub. I think is the most logical and bite-sized way of doing it.
Well, and it goes back to like many hands make light work. You know, there are already so many things that Faded and I and the committee are doing that having these more bite-sized chunks updated by the primary contacts and even by team members who aren't necessarily in a contact role but are saying, hey, you know, I was involved with these four storylines at the very point you know, at the very least we can go ahead and do this. So
And we'll hopefully have some examples that maybe help people give ideas of how they can do things. But let's move on to, I guess, I think the last slide before we get into the stuff that actually needs voting on, which is only like 5 slides, thankfully.
yeah, is this me or you?
This is you.
Okay, well, you know, I'm always about making the FBA bigger
I thought that was
and
me as a
and and,
macro.
and better. I'm sorry. Um, so last year we did attempt to bring in more people from other leagues by encouraging contributors to get involved. Uh, you know, as an outreach to those leagues. Um, people gave us their feedback and said that they were worried it was taking away from the FBA instead of growing it. So we listened to that. But it doesn't change the fact that we still need, you know, people at the contributor level to um step up and help us out. I got into this a little bit before, you know, uh, there is a growing to-do list of tasks that um, need that the wiki still needs. For instance, uh, you know, and we worked on some of this earlier this month or last month. The team pages going back all the way to 2014 to 2015. There's still missing information. Even with people chipping in and us saying, "Hey, we need this stuff to be updated." That's just and that's just one example. There's still a lot that is in has been incomplete since that time. Um, just because it's not even a matter of like want or need. It's a matter of having the time and energy and availability to do it. And so again, many hands make light work. If you guys can help us out with any of this, that's super super helpful to those of us who might need to focus on things like, I don't know, uh moving the server to, moving the
Yeah.
wiki to a different server, or reviewing draftees, or stuff like that. So these are often things that we want to get to, but there's always something else that's more important in terms of the league uh being run, that we, Fade and I, and the committee, and even the wiki rats that we employ from time to time, don't have a chance to get to, because we see them as smaller tasks that eventually we can get to, but at the same time, they're these aren't things that require an extensive knowledge of MediaWiki to be able to do. And so having that support from the contributors is so important, and being able to have people help us out with that would be great.
And I
Um,
was gonna say, Rourke and I, when we both joined the league, a lot of the grunt work, that was stuff we volunteered to do. I mean, I know when I came in 2014 and 15, um, the one that I asked Stevie back when he was commissioner, like, hey, can I be helpful with something? And he asked me to find out who had double doubles for the teams, who uh, was the players of the game, things that I was able to do to help take some of the workload off of him having to eventually do. And I know Rookie, you again, I don't want to say you got trapped into it, but a similar mindset of hey, how can I help? And it is a big help to be able to get some of those things off of us.
mhm. um,
And Alana bring up a great point of it took her 16 hours to do the majority of that spreadsheet. That was just checking to see if something was there. That wasn't even editing everything. Imagine in terms of actually doing the work, it's probably going to be about a 10 times that potentially, with it being all the way back to 2014-15.
and and if you ask how can you help, and if our is nothing at the moment, that doesn't mean we don't need that either. That means one of two things: either one of us is so busy with something else at the moment that we can't, like, we don't have time to sit down and actually think about what can actually be done, and we might be able to loop back around to you in an hour or 4 hours or in a day, or even maybe a week, and say, okay, well, if you need help, like, if you want to help, here's how you can help. If we say not this very second, it usually means that we're either busy with something, or that um we've paused and stepped back to assess the situation to see what needs doing. Um, the other part of that is that there are um there are things that come up that we have asked for help that we haven't gotten help for, and it ends up being one of those things where if we deny, okay, well, okay, I guess we'll go ahead and do it ourselves because nobody wants to step up. And so, there will be times our some of our asks are super menial and super trivial, and you might think that you're busy work, but these are, if we're asking for help in something, it's actually something that's going to help us further down. Either it's going to set the groundwork for something more important later on, or it's going to help us sort things out, or really organize things so that we can do things like build centralized hubs, or something like that. You know, there have been times where people have said, "How can we help?" And we say, "Okay, well, we need you to do X." Like, we need you to, check all the double doubles, or something. And some contributors have said, "Well, that's dumb. That's boring. I really don't want to do that." We're like, "Well, that's what we need at this personal, like, at this point in time." and it might not necessarily mean that that's all you're going to do for us, but that often the first step in any of these tasks is seeing where we are, organizing where, and taking stock. And if if we can get help with that, then we can start implementing these changes that you guys are asking for in a more
Timely manner.
efficient manner. Yeah, exactly.
So as Nico kind of asked, like, what can we do? What can how can he help right now? Well, that kind of goes back to you weren't here for the very beginning of the meeting, but we are actually working on transferring the website from a server to another server. So right now the whole website is locked. So there is nothing at the moment anyone can really do with editing the website. However, once the website is over and transferred, we will be moving towards trying to get those team pages updated. That's kind of the first global goal I'd like for the community to work on, getting the majority of stuff updated. And I will actually uh, make videos to help people hopefully understand how to do it. Again, not everyone is maybe necessarily comfortable with editing a media wiki page. However, everything is undoable. So even if you mess something up, it can easily be undone, and anything that is catastrophically destroyed is that has a potential to be catastrophically destroyed is protected anyways. So you don't have to worry about, you know, oh no, I deleted one comma and now the whole FBA wiki is down.
Yeah, anything can be rolled back. And the other thing is, I wanted to point, like it doesn't, you don't, to help the league, you don't necessarily have to be doing something to the wiki. Adding lore and contributing lore is a huge part of this project. And your story may trigger three other stories. You never know what's going to happen. But if you're unsure of what to do, and we're saying, well, we're holding off for a week because we need to figure out what the next step is. If you want to jump in right away, write a story about a character, create like approach a primary contact and say, I want to write a story about an NPC. There, even when there's not a specific project that we are asking for help for, you can always help the league and add to the league by adding story lore to it.
Yeah, like I said, that's something that we want to work on, and I kind of derailed your whole thing, rookie. Sorry.
It's all good. I've been doing that to you all night, so um, uh, and this kind of goes into the last part of this section here, is that by adding lore, you're adding your player pages more stories. There has been so much work into live roleplay or Twitter roleplay, um, but unless people are able to catch it either in chats, and again, we're trying to move to a central roleplay chat to help with that, or on Twitter, which is so fleeting. Um, you see what I did there, uh, but the unless people see it in the moment, they're going to end up missing important events for your team. Um, so it is critical that, like, once these things happening, writing up a little summary. Uh, if you think that these interactions might be helpful for people when they're looking at players, or even the team as a whole, um, you know, write it up, put it in somewhere a little more accessible. It doesn't even have to be a story. Like, it doesn't have to be a story. Just like, you can even say, okay, this thing happened. Here's a link. Um, just putting it down where it's a little more accessible, um, on your player pages, uh, or your team pages. With things that happens. Yeah, your play, as Matt says, your player page is and should be much more than just your drafty background. It should be a place where milestones for your players occur, where you link your stories, where you link your work. I retired Lance Wildfire this year, but I've always used his page as a a way to update what he's up to in the league, what his major milestones have been, um, and and that's why these um uh these pages um are meant to serve as personal histories. They're not like they're meant to be living wiki pages. Is really it's a hybrid of a place to put your stories, a place to put your art, and an in character wiki page. And whatever wherever you lean on that spectrum is up to you, but um it's meant to serve as a history for your player. And I should be able to go to any player that I am interested in and go to their page, and especially if they've been here for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years, and see that progression. I mean, even if it's not updated like all the time, if it's updated like once every 2 years, that's still better than nothing. Um, but even just like notable interactions is a great way to summarize what happens.
Yeah,
Make your character more accessible, and make your it is a better way to get people invested in your characters by showing that history.
yeah, I know. Okay, I'm sorry. We're trying to move it along. It, Again, just even summary. I need to work on it too. But for example, how are people going to know that Leon Demont was upset about how he was the situation in Bangor unless I write it out? I mean, expecting everyone to read the stories is not always going to work. Um, and it helps to have a quick summary. Someone can go and look, and uh, Leon Delmont left Seattle due to blank, blank, blank reasons. Now they know. Now they can say, okay, I don't have to uh, try to interpret what happened. But that's kind of the point. We want guys to start considering updating their team page, their player pages more with even summaries, especially if it's a lot of Twitter interactions. You can summarize the big ones for the year. Maybe so and so got into a fight with another character over Twitter. You know, that's something to mark down. Maybe there's a rivalry starting, like that kind of mindset of having it, guys. So you know what happened, but not everyone else does, and we can't read minds, unfortunately.
Like, do your characters justice and service by putting their milestones on their character pages is really what it comes down to.
Hmm.
However you want to mark them, either Twitter links or story links or artwork links or just their history in general.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next section here because we do want to wrap it up.
Yep. It's already
We're
been
going to
two
try to
hours.
wrap things up in the next half hour. Sorry that the, this particular meeting is always long.
Yeah. So there's only like 6 slides left, guys, and we'll wrap it up after that. So these are suggestions that we kind of can implement immediately. Slash, definitely need a vote to do before we. I mean, we don't definitely need a vote. Technically, the committee can make the decision, but we want to hear your guys' point on that. Um, so the very first one, it was suggested that an extra restriction be added to how draftees are ranked. So currently, the draftee ranking is determined by the average of each committee member's ranking with no restrictions besides not having more than one top 24 draftee from a contributor. The proposed change was to add a restriction so that a contributor can't have a lottery ranked, which is a top 8 player, in back to back seasons. So that means if in the 2020 FBA draft you had a character ranked number 3, in the 2021 FBA draft your character can be ranked as high as 9 but no higher than that. However,
so
in
like
uh,
Callum last year was ranked in the top 8. So my draftees this year under this rule, if it was implemented, could not be any higher than 9.
and the idea is to kind of encourage more variety of contributors with top ranked players. I know some people feel like they see the same contributor in the top 8 every year, and it is nice to have more variety of who's involved. Um, I don't necessarily think it's been an issue, but it definitely occasionally there's one player who's really active or one contributor that's really active, and they have like a 3 or 4 year run where they're submitting top 8 characters. I think Patrick, for example, had he put a lot of work into his bios, and I think 3 years in a row had a top 8 player. And it can kind of be discouraging if not having a a highly ranked player, because it's the same people every year seemingly being ranked highly. Um, and obviously this wouldn't affect how teams can draft players. Teams We're never going to tell them who they're allowed to draft besides not drafting their own players in the first round.
Hmm.
Um, if they want to draft the number 20th ranked player at number 2, that's their decision.
You know,
Uh,
it could be like there's no centers down until number 20.
yeah, and I mean, like I said, it's this was the proposal was lottery level, just because even a top 5, like I think Mad had mentioned, that's still um, so. For example, I've only ever had one player ranked in the top 5, and I've had a top 24 player pretty much every year I've submitted one. I think I've had a 10, a 14, a 1, and a 10. So, uh, again, it's I think a lottery is a good cutoff, just because that's seen as kind of the top of the class, quote unquote. Even though with the FBA we care more about the storylines long term. I mean, Lance Wildfire, Marcus Knight, players who went undrafted, arguably some of the best players of their draft class. So, just being a lottery ranked player doesn't mean success is guaranteed. But the idea of the person, and I agree, kind of with the mindset is that um, having that 1 to 8 always be not available for back-to-back years. It just gives more variety, and that's something again you guys can vote on, deciding if um, this is something you want to see.
So all of these things that are in the section are going to be something that we're going to I think within a week or so we're going to put up a vote for them. So we want to give people a couple of days to think about it, maybe a couple days if they haven't, if they're not here tonight, to be able to see this before we open it up to the league to vote on these things. Um, but it is, you know, the everything else that we're going to cover tonight are things that we want to put up to larger community-wide decision, not just committee decision.
Hmm.
So, moving on, if uh, if if I think we're
Yeah.
okay. So, currently, um, there was a suggestion that we change how we list the positions that are listed in the kind of in the wiki and in the engine um, to be more specific. Um, Currently, players are listed as guard, guard forward, forward guard, forward, forward center, center forward, and center. And there's kind of a breakdown here. The way that we've kind of listed it is that, you know, anyone who is a guard can play point guard or shooting guard without penalty to their stats. Guard forward, forward guard are shooting guard and small forward without penalty, and so on and so forth. So the way that the engine is currently set up is that these individuals aren't necessarily set up to do one over the other, beyond kind of the stats that people have sort of said that they're good at. And so, you know, people are like, well, it says guard. I don't know if they're like a primary, like a point guard first or a shooting guard first. You know, the way that it's set up currently is that guard can play either position without penalty to their stats. And so it's in from an engine standpoint, and this is opening the hood a little bit, but just so that you guys understand, like anyone who's listed as a guard can play point guard or shooting guard without and switch back and forth without any issues. They're not primarily from an engine standpoint, not necessarily from a story standpoint, but just looking at the engine. They can play point guard or shooting guard and switch it back and forth as many times as you want without without receiving any sort of detriment to their stats. Same for guard for GF and FG. They can go back and forth, shooting guard, small forward without any penalty, and so on and so forth. And so we've tried to explain that a couple times, but I think that it hasn't been entirely clear to people that like, okay, well, I see like forward, which what does that mean? Like, are they a small forward first or are they power forward first? Um, from an engine standpoint, it really doesn't matter at all. However, the proposed change here would be to have players listed as what they consider their primary position and then list their secondary position. Um,
if they have one.
so if they have one. So uh, part of why this was suggested, and we understand the logic here. Please understand. If someone's a point guard or shooting guard, um, guard from like a story perspective, it doesn't indicate what they're better at. Um, what uh, what this means is that um, uh, you know, if we implement this change, someone is a point guard first and a shooting guard second, for instance, they would have a small penalty if they were playing shooting guard, even though they're list, they are no longer being listed as a general guard in terms of the engine. They are being listed as a point guard first and a shooting guard second. Um, and so if they're playing outside of their primary position by a step, um, uh, you know, to their secondary position, they get a small penalty. And if they play outside of one or the other, um, uh, then they would get a large detriment. Now the major downside to changing to this, um, uh, and again, right now we the way that it's set up is that it's open, that you know we are developing the way it's developed currently indicates what positions they can play without penalty. Not necessarily what is their story canon. Um, we'd have to edit a lot of page templates since um this is how the engine's set up currently. So we'd have to um go back and really look at all of the um uh positions and checking with contributors and what have you. I'm not saying that we're opposed to this, but if this is something that people actually truly want, um it's going to take time to implement.
A long time.
Um
I mean, guys who have been here for this is how the system has been for literally ever. Um, Mainly because it did give leeway. If we just call someone a guard, that encompasses, uh, you know, not penalizing someone because they didn't understand that, hey, why are you playing this shooting guard at point guard? He is terrible at passing, and he doesn't play that position anyways. Um, it was kind of as a, I don't want to say training wheels, but
it
some
was meant to
leeway.
help contributors. And I know people are saying they don't have that information, so they can't like play the optimal spot for that character. But it's really like you have to look at it the other way. It's actually we're not penalizing you for playing that character slightly out of their primary position. Um, you have to dig a little deeper to say, okay, well, this character isn't great at passing. Maybe they're probably closer to a shooting guard than they are a point guard. Just like, so there was a little bit of inference there, but from an engine standpoint, you're not if you're going to play a guard out of position, um, you're not going to get penalized for that. Um, and that was by design, not not to make things more confusing.
Yeah, and Matt, that referred to something Stevie was doing, and I disliked the way he was doing it, and I didn't like that. But yeah, again, this is something where we can do it. But if you want to talk about team pages being a massive undertaking, this is even bigger. Because I mean, you're talking about every player page having to determine and get in contact with people, and then if you can't get in contact with people, deciding for them potentially how their players are supposed to be positioned. Because let's say you have a forward, are they a power forward or are they a small forward? They're 6'10". Okay, I'd say power forward. Oh wait, they're really athletic. Maybe they are a small forward.
And their contributor hasn't been here for 3 years,
Yeah.
so we can't ask.
So it. I'm not saying that to discourage people from voting no. I'm just saying that if we go this route, we're not gonna undo it if people don't like it necessarily immediately.
We're we're not opposed to moving down this road, but it is a road that we can't take back.
At least for 3 years, because
Yeah.
even with everyone helping, and we're going to need a lot of people to help with something like this, and it's probably going to, even if we, this would be a year long probably adjustment, because I don't even know how many templates would have to be adjusted for this.
Again, we're not opposed to the idea, but we just want to make people aware that if we decide to move in this direction, and again, not like discouraging people from doing it, um, that it is something that we are willing to do, but it's gonna take a lot of work.
Basically, we're happy to buy you a car for your 16th birthday, but we're not going to take it back because it's the wrong color.
It's gonna be a fixer upper.
Yeah. So, just definitely think about this, guys. I mean, I know a few of you definitely have said yes. I really like you really like the idea. So like I said, I'd be fine going this route, and I definitely want people helping with it. This is kind of one of those like fundamental changes to the structure of the FBA, which is why this is a vote. Because if this was just me and I think the committee, this is kind of where the old players sometimes we know how things are, and we tend not to be like, okay, we need to change this, but we all understand it, so we don't really think, oh, we need to change this. Because again, all this I know. I mean, I built the damn engine, so I understand how all that works. But for new contributors, it could be confusing, and that's why
Yeah.
we're giving it to you to vote on it with your perspectives.
All right, moving on, because I do want to get this done by
We only have
10:30 at the
15
latest.
minutes. 15
Yeah,
minutes for
come
three
on,
slides. We got this.
it's four
Um,
slides.
so more impactful sixth furs. This was mentioned that the NBA, the sixth man is typically the player that is a really good scorer, who comes off the bench when the main scorers from the starting lineup are subbed out to rest. Don't ignore that typo. That's tired snap typo. So basically, that means that the sixth man tends to have as many points per game as starters do. Because essentially they are starter level in terms of scoring, maybe not in some areas, but it's a strategy decision where they play um, significant minutes because they have the talent of a starter in some areas, and they help carry the team forward when some of the starters are resting. So the proposed change would be an increase to the impactfulness of six furs. I want to say overall, because I do like the variety of both saying that you can have six furs who are specializing in scoring, but also having six furs who are specialized in their defensive impact. Um, that's one of the things with the FBA engine as a whole is I've tried to avoid pigeonholing where only one way of building a team is how you win. So that's kind of where the proposed change idea is. Someone has mentioned that the six for really is kind of confusing, and they aren't as impactful as they really should be if we look at the NBA comparatively.
So something to consider for Um,
Um, MW has mentioned something. What would you think about a shortened season or a break to implement the proposed changes? Um, so my first year in the league was the year we had the shortened season, and I absolutely hated it. I'm gonna be honest. I felt like I was gypped my first season to an extent because of the shortened season status, and I really don't want to have other contributors feel that way. I understood why we did the shortened season, but it really wasn't. It felt more like the I don't want to say it was a wasted season, but I was missing something. Something was
I,
kind of missed because of it.
as someone who worked in the administration during that season, I I do not feel like there was a great enough impact for the benefits to the shortened season were severely outweighed by the detriments for sure. Um, I think putting things into place over the course of a year is probably the better way to go. Getting things developed for an upcoming season is probably better. Um, just knowing that because there's some of these things are going to take longer than an extended break to get developed. And given the amount of time that people have and the kind of there was a lot of disappointment in that shortened season as Faded sort of mentions. People felt like we really didn't commit. If we were going to commit to a shortened season, then we should have committed to a year off. Is the um general feeling of that season. And if we committed, and people would have rather had a full season than a year off. Um, and so this is kind of looking at what was done in the past, and really what it comes down to is that these some of these things are going to take time, and there is no huge benefit that we can see that a shortened season would provide to us that a regular season wouldn't already be able to accomplish. Because these changes are going to take longer than even an extended break might be able to accomplish.
And not only that, but if we shorten the season, that kind of puts a deadline on these things happening, and that just puts more stress on us trying to meet those deadlines. Basically, it would not be a break for Rourke and I and anyone else working on this. We would be under a crunch time, and then as soon as we're done, immediately the season would start again. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'd rather try and pace it out over the year if possible. Except for again some of these things like having a more impactful sixth fur. I can go in the engine, and that's the beauty of having the customizable engine. I can tweak a few settings and make it so that the sixth furs have more impact today if I needed to. Um, so that's kind of why we're voting on some of these things now because they're easy to implement now, or they're
especially
so
since we're doing work on the wiki
yeah.
and engine.
Yeah, Alana, we'll try and again have people help assist with that, and like again using the help volunteers needed thing for changes, and we'll try and definitely have videos available showing people. I know Mad did a media wiki thing showing people how to do some things, and we'll again kind of do that. But we got 2 slides to go, guys. We can do this in 9 minutes. Um,
Great.
next one,
Um, so
3 slides
another
wide.
thing that we want to uh, implement is more scoring variety. Um, Currently, as the engine stands, the um, it's a little too equal in terms of their scoring distribution compared to the NBA, which is kind of our benchmark, as we mentioned before. If we vote into this change, we would see a higher top end average of scoring. Um, not to be as extreme as Harden putting up 36 points per game back in 18-19, more like upper 20s. Um, you know, it's it's something to discuss slash vote on. Um, we don't want to make these arbitrary changes to the engine without discussing it league wide. Um, we can make suggestions, but we this is another one of those things that we feel is probably better suited to turn to league itself as opposed to just having five of us or two of us make that.
Yeah, and this is again, what do you guys want to see from the league? I know obviously some people don't really care too much about the numbers. Um, we've gamified essentially this league to an extent, along with the storytelling. It's not just a pure storytelling league. Um, I could see arguments both ways of increasing it, making the all-star level players a little bit differential from the starters, or having some starters that are more defensive specialized, maybe score a little bit less and have more impact on defense. So again, this is something we just kind of want you guys to think about. Would you like to see more of that high-end variety, or are you happy where we currently stand with it? Again,
This is like one of those polling questions that happens in the presidential debate, where like, okay, you're voting for whoever you want for the president, and then you get to like question seven is like, do you want to redistrict the tax lines so that that's kind of what this is. Like, it's important enough that we're bringing it to the attention of the league, and we want to know what your opinion is. But at the same time, we also recognize that this is a change going forward, but we feel like it is a better change for the community to decide versus just the two of us to do so.
and I'm sure this is going to be a split. Again, I'm not expecting 100% of you guys to go one way or the other. And just, I lied. We have two slides to go, guys. I'm sorry. I didn't see the bottom slide. But
I told you.
yeah, this is again kind of a simpler one. The next one's a little bit more complicated to discuss, but I'll try and get through it quickly. So another suggestion that was made was to allow custom minute quarter rotations. So currently, team staff set the minutes their players play based per quarter based on one of three settings: equalized, normal, and aggressive. Equalized spreads the minutes out. Normal focuses on the starters and top bench, and aggressive makes it so only the starters and like the top three bench players play. That's not a lot of variety that you can do, but it makes it super simple for people to set things if they don't necessarily know how to do a minute breakdown or do a good rotation potentially. The proposed change would allow individuals to create a set amount of minutes the player would play for each quarter. So, for example, they could say, I want my point guard, small forward, and center to play a full 12 minutes, but I want my shooting guard and power forward to only play like 8 minutes. Maybe they're not as strong as a starter, or maybe they have a really good bench player that can play that position that they want to split the minutes with. This does give more flexibility for team staff to strategize and use their players, like, for example, with better stamina longer, while balancing those players who might be really explosive but have poor endurance. Uh, this would not be the main option. It would be an alternative so that the current system would still be available. This would just be for those who really want to have that flexibility to do it. This again comes down to it will take a little while to implement, and it may not be for this next season due to having to redesign the template and redesign the engine to accept the changes to the template and how it's output. And that it may not be possible in the sense of what we currently have. I may have to literally build something from scratch. I really hope not, but we'll see. Um, if this is something people want, again, there is one caveat to this, and it's actually something that will probably be implemented anyways, is any errors set up. If you set up a faulty roster, we're not going to wait any longer for you to fix it, because I can't be delaying my day for a couple hours waiting on someone to get back to me. So going forward, and if this thing goes through, if you submit a bad roster, it'll be up to the commissioner who's running the game to fix it how we think you intended for it to be done. But that's just for the brevity of being able to move along and not have, one of us sitting here for a couple hours waiting on one person to get back with a fix because they decide to put 12 minutes for every player on the team to play every minute of every game.
Exactly. So, we're gonna use our best judgment um to uh make sure that we adjust your rotation. And basically what it's gonna come down to is we're probably gonna, like, if it's a bench player, we're gonna pull them out of the rotation and we're gonna move say it's the number four bench player. Um we're gonna put five into four, six into five, seven into six, and then we're gonna take the first available um uh person from your roster and put them in that seventh spot. So we're not just gonna, like, randomly plug in, like, say your starting small forward is um out. We're not gonna take, like, somebody off the bench and plug them into that spot. We'll at least use a little bit of judgment. Okay, your next best small forward is currently in the number two spot for the bench. So we'll pull them. We'll plug that hole and then we'll move everyone. Um, again, this is to our discretion. It's always in your best interest to make those changes and keep an eye on those injury lists, but we do want to streamline this process a little bit, um, uh, so that we can get results out in a timely manner. There's been a lot of days this season in particular where we were waiting on players to be subbed out. So we're trying to avoid that moving forward.
Yep, and 60 seconds, Rorky. Get the last one done.
All right. There is we want to talk about off-season contributor boosts quickly. Currently, there are only two boost opportunities to submit their players. We want to propose that a third opportunity happens before the season starts. The idea is that it reflects players' off-season training area of focus and rewards contributors who are active. Ooh.
Done. Good night, everyone.
Um,
I'm
Good
kidding.
night, everyone.
We did it. Uh,
So this is something that we want to get a vote on as well, and kind of get a read on how people feel regarding uh this. So
yeah, and the only reason why we're really saying this as a vote is because this can lead to the inflation that we tried really hard to fix by nerfing the entire league. Uh, that a couple seasons ago, everyone remembers that like 10% nerf we had to do. So I mean, it's possible that in a year, this might make inflation start to become a problem again, like in 2 or 3 years, and we might see another one of those nerfs have to come out. But in the end, I think it's a good idea. It makes sense in terms of off season players are training, they're focusing on whatever. They only get so many points to spend during the year, anyways. So being able to give them an extra 10 points is helpful for the contributors.
yeah,
But like I said, that's
and
just something to think about.
this wouldn't be limited to team. This would be just to players.
Hmm. Teams aren't
Um,
meeting at this time. Their players are supposed to be off, recovering, training, whatever. Yeah, and it would be
right.
the standard 10-point boost. So again, it wouldn't be like a 30-point boost or anything.
Um, and those 10-point boosts add up for sure.
They do. I mean,
Um,
that's 30 points in a year. Teams are allowed to spend 25 points in a year on a player. So I mean, you could basically get 55 points.
yep. So
But
that's just something to consider. All right, that is what we have for this evening. If people want to stick around and ask questions, we are happy to answer them. If people need to leave, we totally understand. We appreciate everyone being here this evening. I know it was,
I want to leave.
you aren't everyone. You are a snap.
I'm
Snaps
sleepy.
don't have rights. Um,
I'm sleepy.
I'm sleepy too. I'm hungry and sleepy and dopey and doc. Um, so yeah, anyone, again, guys, thank you so much for bearing with us for these last 2.5 hours. We are gonna stick around for probably another half an hour tops.
No.
Just stick around for another half an hour tops to answer some questions. If you guys have from the from the meeting. I'm gonna put Snep to bed in 28 minutes at the
I have
latest.
to let my
Um,
dog out and take my contacts out and
if you needed to go do that now, I can
no, I can do my
field
dog
questions for
later.
two
I
minutes.
won't be going to bed until at least 30 minutes after we're done. I'm
Yeah,
off tomorrow. It's okay. I can sleep in as late as I want.
yeah, exactly. So this is really your time, guys. If you totally understand, but we're here to answer your questions. Remember that there is a couple of um minutes delay in terms of when you ask your question versus us answering. So, if we don't answer right away, or if we're answering another question, we will try to get everyone in. What would be super helpful is if you guys at both me and Faded, so that we can see your questions. Um, uh, Otherwise, like this is your time. We're here for you at this point. Um, Uh, but if we don't get any questions, I'd say in the next 7 minutes or so. So at 10:40, 7 minutes as of when I'm recording this, not as of when you're hearing it. Then we will exit the chat. But if anyone has any questions, again, this is now. Now is the time to ask while everyone's here, or we're happy to field questions, um, in private or in the actual text chat later on. So I am going to keep talking and keep rambling until we get a question, or until it's 10:40 Eastern Standard Time in Florida, which everyone knows is 5 seconds earlier than um, Eastern Standard Time um, in the Carolinas. Oh my God, guys, I don't know if you know who the best boy is, but like it is
Snap's
total.
dog.
Oh my God, 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 oh my God. Oh my God. So the best boy, or good boy. I don't want to say that it's I'm I'm not putting on a voice right now for but he's well, I have to say that if there was ever a good boy in the league, his name would be Roy. It'd be good boy Roy. Um, definitely not definitely not a golden lab who could like um uh be a potential draftee. We are going to update the list of universities. It's not on the chat. Um, it is something that we should do and have been doing, especially as we've had um uh uh you know people um suggest them to us and um uh that is on the list. That list of universities is entirely out of date. A couple people have added to the one on the wiki. I know that Templeton has been added. I know that uh, Claiborne has been added. So the wiki list is more up to date, and people can add their own universities to that when the wiki is no longer unlocked. Is there a list of present tasks or tasks can be done after the migration that we can contribute to? Um, so, um,
I like
we
how
will
they're
need
not
the,
adding me either.
yeah, yeah. So make sure that you're adding, well, because you're not talking, you went to bed. Um, I would not say anything faded if I were you, so that you can actually go to bed. But no, we as we're sort of getting ready we will try to be better about making a list of present tasks. I know in the last couple of years we've not been great about keeping that to-do list up to date, and I apologize. Like some of that has just been like out of sight, out of mind. Some of it has been like, okay, well, we're at this if we do that, and that's really that's kind of been on us a little bit. We will try to update, post and update a to-do list that is accessible for people to be able to help, as well as uh, show that they've helped. So, it will be one of my plans for this off season is to create a more living document regarding a to-do list that's more accessible than the one that we currently have, which is also out of date. Um, so I will make sure that get something up by the time that the migration is done. Hopefully beforehand, but I have no promises up until that point. Just based on time. But we will because we were asking for more help from contributors. I think it's only fair that that help is readily available for people who are looking to do that help.
So I
Um,
think TC was kind of bringing up a question slash suggestion about regarding player contracts, and I have to disagree in terms of trying to limit what a player's value is seen as. Um, because even in real life, I mean, a player on a bad team, if they're the star player of that team, they tend to get offered um, more in terms of what they get. In fact, a lot of people who are on bad teams actually uh, outperform what they're worth. Really, I mean, I'm not. I guess a little bit of example is J.C. Gold. While he was on Arizona, he definitely outperformed what his contract expectation, I would argue, was, because you saw when he went to Seattle, he really didn't live up to the value of his contract. However, that is kind of also part of the strategy and understanding of, is this player coming from a bad team? Maybe they're not going to perform as well on my team, but that is also, again, looking at any professional league, you see that with players who have uh, they go and take big bucks because they've outperformed on their team and they look better on their team because it's a bad team, and they leverage that to get a really big contract, juicy contract offer from another team, and then they end up seeing a bit of a decline. Um, so I think it also just I get where you're coming from, trying to give people general ideas of how valuable a player might be worth so that they aren't overthrowing money at them. But at the same time, I don't want to say we bent over backwards, but we provide a lot of opportunities for people to make up when they make mistakes. We have a amnesty clause, we have renegotiation, we allow people to use cap that's left over from the last season. Um, so we have been as flexible as possible to have players not, and teams not put in a terrible situation because of a bad contract or overpaying a contract. Anything you want to add, Worky?
no, I think that pretty much sums it up.
Alana has asked, uh, is there a way to know how to present our draftee submissions? I've gotten conflicting notes despite taking revision suggestions. I'm not sure how to implement things like stats, which I'm super bad at and haven't gotten a straight answer for. This could also be a thing folks might experience. Um, I mean, that can definitely be something that gets worked on as like a draftee submission guide. I mean, we have one already, but it's more so explaining the bare basics of basketball to someone who may not know basketball. And part of it is also subjective because I've seen a lot of ways to present draftees that I've found interesting. I've seen ones where someone has decided to do it in an interview format where they basically have a almost a short story where the player is being written on by a writer with some quotes interspersed throughout versus a very technical bio like you might see on a wiki page. I don't want to say there's any wrong way of any right way of doing it because everyone's going to have a different opinion on what is the right way, which is why all five committee members give input into it based on what
Yeah,
we see.
and it sort of changes like a little bit based on the committee. Like, Fade and I look for certain things that we try to keep consistent every year. Um, I, I would say that sometimes committee members like looking at stats and say, okay, this is more realistic. Sometimes people are looking more at the stories, and to be fair, sometimes those are inconsistent from year to year. And there we try to smooth that out a little bit as the commissioners, but at the same time, like it's pe people are looking for different metrics, and they sort of have like their own internal metrics. I will say that stats themselves aren't the end all be all. Um, and Faded can correct me if he feels that's different. Um, you know, we don't look at just sports rating for the draft characters. And it's one of the reasons why we do want to provide feedback to people. We haven't had a chance to do all that much this season because everyone's been like incredibly busy. But we're not going to outright reject a character because we think that they are written poorly a from a sports standpoint. We are going to go back to contributors and say, we sort of see where you're going with this. Here are some suggestions that we think will put them in mind. Or the flip side of being, we're not sure where you're going with this. Can you elaborate? Um, we do our best to try and give that feedback and make that happen every year. I recognize that some years we've been better about than others. Um, Partly again because of the availability of the committee. And we're even if the submissions close, that doesn't mean that the feedback that we're going to provide closes. The only other thing that I can kind of speak to that is that if a committee member does reach out to you and say, "Hey, these are things that we think need to be worked on, or that we need to like um, consider before we can make this a viable candidate," um, that you do respond to those in a timely manner. Um, because we've had submissions that we've rejected because we've we, we've asked questions that we feel are pretty open and simple that contributors have said, well, I'm not going to answer that. And so we say, well, okay, your submission is going to be failed. So this is a very long-winded rookie way of saying sometimes it does change from year to year, and that can account for some of that inconsistency. But we are going to be making considered effort this year, especially to make sure that we provide the feedback that we think you need to create a more compelling character within the scope of the universe.
Guys, again, reminder, please at Forky and I see a number of people asking questions that are not. Um, I can't keep track of things as I'm scrolling through conversations. Um,
Yeah, if you haven't added us in your question, it's we can't. I mean, we can see them, but they're a lot harder to see. If you tag us in those questions, they highlight for us, and so we can actually respond a
I'm
little.
seeing one of TC's. Do players' draft stocks drop if a top 24 or non top 24 outperforms in the combine? If not, I think it should. I mean, the combine isn't how well you play basketball, first of all. It's more physical stats, if anything. So I would disagree with that. I mean, obviously, the draft people like to highlight all these things of, oh, so and so has like a 40-inch vertical. Oh my God. Um, and if that was the case, because the combine's random, I mean, when the players are created, we do try to give them some variety or some stratification of okay, here are our top 24 players. This is where we uh, kind of want them to be more towards the top of the combine. But at the same time, if you have players like centers, power forwards, small forwards who are not focused on being athletic, the way the combine is, they're not. The combine's not built for them. The combine's built for players that run fast, jump high, and shoot the ball from three. So if we did that, you would have nothing but guards at the top of the draft class. And I mean, I know what you're trying to say in the sense of it should factor in, but if that's the case, we would make the combine more rigid in terms of less randomness involved with the top 24.
And we've had committee members change their votes or rank people based on their combine reading. So there has been some of that, but at the same time, we do restrict that rank changing to no more than five
Well,
above or below.
and it's not just because of the combine, but because of the role playing and the engagement during the combine. Because the combine is really meant to be a role playing and a story opportunity. That is the first opportunity a lot of these players are going to get to interact with each other. Um, so honestly, I'd get rid of the whole stats thing if I felt like uh, we could. I think it's more there as a guide of like, hey, we're. It's like the box scores. It is a vehicle to carry the story forward. It is not meant to be the end all be all.
Right, and again, I can only speak to my own experience with the combine, as a player and commissioner. I sort of get to see it from both ends. But as a player this year, like Delta and I had so many stories come out of that role play of the and to an extent, Kit as Zach, and that whole kind of like storyline that developed out of those results. They didn't really have an impact on where people were ranked necessarily, but they did develop much like the takeaway from that was developing a much more rich and interesting story than would have come out if we just decided, okay, well, there are no results, you kind of get to do whatever you want. um it really, it's really more meant to be another tool in your toolbox to develop that like universe, as opposed to like a hard and fast um uh you know uh rule. But at the same time, again, it can affect, in some ways it can affect where people end up in that final ranking, both as how they did. If someone consistently does well because the dice rolled them well, much higher than they were ranked initially, someone might use that as a consideration to move them around a little bit. And the other flip side of that is that the results of the combine aren't necessarily the only thing that get looked at during the combine. And this is both for the FBA world and in NBA. You know, you've got you've got these scouts for the teams that are looking at, okay, how are these players playing against each other during a playful scrimmage? How well do they take direction? Um, they're in real life. There are people who are paid,
Intangibles.
yeah, paid to see these intangibles that we can't necessarily represent in a statistical way for the combine, but that gets played out during the story portions. This is why we include both in that combine event, both the role play and the stats.
Also, these stats are pretty much made based off what I read in the bio. So they're not going to be super accurate either, honestly. It's kind of the whole intelligence test thing. It's like, okay, how smart is this person? I have no idea. Unless you sit there and tell me how high I should rank them, which I don't think anyone should have to worry about. But yeah, like so, the combine, it's a good. Their combine and combine games are good vehicles, but I would hate for someone to have a really intricate character design, all that, and then just because of how the dice rolled, them not be a top 24 suddenly because of it. But I think the other last question I've seen is Komori asking about scouting report adding plus and minus. We've gone back and forth between having that and not having that. I mean, I can appreciate it being helpful in terms of giving you an idea if you're more towards the top or the bottom range. It's just the way that the grades are distributed. Um, so the middle of the pack, the C range is the largest, and then each category above and below that gets progressively smaller, like a bell curve. Uh, and because of that, the whole plus and minus ranges can be a little confusing as well, because the plus range for the C is going to be larger than the plus range for an A. And the idea we kind of went with was uh, having these ranges be less specific. Kind of reflects real life in terms of, okay, I don't really know how good of a uh, player they are. I have a general idea. It's not like you can know exactly, hey, this player has a 87 3-point shooting ability, unless you play 2K. That's the only way.
Yeah, and it's like, and if something, there's something that a character is really good at, or players that are really good at in real life, you're gonna be like, oh man, that guy can jump like nobody's business. That's gonna be reflected in that scouting report. Um, if they've got an A in jump, you know that they're gonna have high jumps and maybe they'll like be pretty decent at the dunk contest, stuff like that. If you've got like a B, in something, you're gonna be above average. But they're gonna be more above average players than there are gonna be great players. And so getting that granular gets into like a little bit of um like it almost draws focus away from the story and puts more focus on the simulated
The
portion of the
gamification.
league. Yeah, and we also really kind of want to avoid that. We want the scouting report to be like everything else, kind of guidelines as to how you rate your character and how you see those characters, and not necessarily like a Bible to be dictated. Okay, well, they're at a C, and if I put 40 points into it, and I'm not saying that's where the thing lies, that I can get from a C to a C plus, and then if I put another 30, I can go to like C plus to B minus. Like we don't want to encourage that sort of obsession over um
Points.
points and things like that.
Especially since the off season, there's a random roll on boost and nerfs, so your whole system would collapse after one time. But this is the last chance for questions because we got T minus 4 minutes before Step has to crawl into bed.
Before I unlock him and let him go take his dog out.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, this has happened. I think back in the day, Stevie did put it out there. Like we had gone from having a generic to a plus and minus. And I'm not saying people hated it, but a lot
It
of
pulled
the
focus away from things that people thought were more important.
well, I was gonna say I had more. I mean, I always have people ask me questions like, "Hey, why isn't so and so made it to a B yet or an A yet?" And then it was just ballooning up more and more with the A minus and the A plus. How far away are they from an S? It's like I they're there. We've thought about, I don't want to say gamifying, but adding options of like, hey, you can scout your players and get a better understanding of where their grades are, but that again kind of goes into adding a more work. on top of already a very tight amount of time to dedicate to the FBA. I mean, we just spent 3 hours doing this meeting today, so
Yeah. And you guys, like, I mean, like, I can't tell you, Fate and I do talk pretty regularly and strategize about stuff. Like, there's a lot of work that already goes into, like, trying to develop that balance that we're, I don't, you know, that we're getting better at. Um,
I would like to be able to take a break. Honestly, honestly, guys, since we were commissioners, I don't think we've had longer than a week. We could say we were able just to walk away and not feel like we had to be doing something for the FBA.
I mean, not even a week. Like, um, it's really like, okay, Snap is like, I'm gonna take a week off. I'm like, okay, cool. And
That
then he shows back up 2 days later. I'm just like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be on break. He's like, yeah, but this happened, and
Yeah, I legitimately, I
you
was like,
can't.
I took a week off, and within 3 hours there was drama that needed me to come back on.
And it's not even like, well, Rookie can't handle it, but it's just like, well, we need both of us need to be here to like make sure this doesn't
Implode
get,
at times.
yeah. So, you know, who knows? Maybe we'll have a third like commissioner at
Oh
some
God,
point.
sacrifice new
Um,
blood.
yeah, exactly. And then we leave it in their hands and
The,
pull a Zoidberg and get the heck out of there.
my nickname was Zoidberg in college, but uh, for reference, I mean, this is kind of why commissioners don't last longer than 3 years or 4 years on average because of the burnout. I mean, that's kind of why we went to this two commissioner setup was so that we would hopefully have less burnout. But at the same time, that also kind of meant that the two people who were doing a lot of grunt work suddenly had to do more grunt work on top of that.
Yeah, but we'll spare you guys the details.
But
Um,
it's 1 minute. I was filling time for people to ask the question. But I see 11 o'clock. No questions have been asked. I am shutting it down.
right, well, guys, thank you again so much for joining us. Um, we appreciate everyone sticking around to the bitter end. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to poke us in chat or privately, and we'll be happy to help out. Don't forget all of the snack bar. Um, don't forget that all of the applications are due in various times and places and things. So um, get those primary applications and draft submissions in. Bring a friend. Remember that like new contributors get extra consideration. Um, so if you bring a friend, there's a really good chance that they'll be in the top eight. And if there are more people that bring a friend than 8 people, then we're in a good position. So it's a win-win situation. Um, and yeah, you know, remember to vote early and often. We'll have those voting options for you. More information about them as well as the ballot will come out um, uh, when we are able to um, do so. So,
Morky,
once
stop.
again, okay. Love you guys. Good night.
Night.